Hi. The temperature this afternoon in Austin is 105 and rising. It's supposed to get up to 107. And tomorrow, 108 or 109. But I'm out here nevertheless, despite the cicadas in the background, to talk to you about one of the fundamental, one of the most important and influential works in all of Western philosophy, Plato's Republic. Now, it's a book that is quite complex. It's long. It consists of 10 separate books, one after the other, many of them dealing with rather distinct topics. And so I'm going to separate this series into the various books. And sometimes I might even have to subdivide one of the books into 2 lectures just to get everything across, because Socrates often shifts from one topic to another within the context of that individual book of the Republic. Today I'm going to start with Book 1. Throughout the Republic, the general question is, what is justice? What is justice in the soul? What is justice in the state? But pretty quickly, as we'll see, the topic shifts to a comparison between the just life and the unjust life. Which is happier? Is it better, in effect, to live justly, or is it better to live unjustly? And Socrates is going to maintain, famously, that it is better to live justly. But many of his opponents throughout are going to be arguing the opposite, that it's actually better to be unjust and to take advantage of others. So we're going to look at this work as a whole, but really just bit by bit, because it is so complex and so rich. The Republic contains many of Socrates' most famous points, not only the allegory of the cave, the divided line, the theory of forms, but also the ring of Gyges, his analysis of various forms of government. There are many, many things that are worth talking about. Today we're going to focus on the debate that occurs in Book 1 between Socrates and Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus is a bully. He is a fellow who comes along and is an utter cynic about philosophical topics, thinks that Socrates is just utterly wasting his time, and that thinking about justice is wasting everybody's time. So let's take a look at the details of Book 1 of the Republic and understand how Socrates fights a bully, how he argues against Thrasymachus. Book 1 starts with Socrates, together with 2 other people, Glaucon and Adeimantus, encountering an old man, Cephalus. Now here it's worth pointing out that Glaucon and Adeimantus are actually Plato's older brothers. So they're real people and, well, siblings of Plato himself. Now, what happens here is that they talk to Cephalus. And here, I'll anglicize it. I think in Greek it's really Cephalus, but let's call him Cephalus. It's a little bit easier to say. Anyway, Cephalus is talking about and reflecting on his life. And he says, you know, it's important in life to live a life of justice, a life of piety, doing the right thing. And so Socrates asks him, well, it's very interesting that you say this, that it's important to live a just life. What is justice? And what we get then is the very first of a series of definitions that people attempt to give of justice in Book 1 of the Republic. Cephalus says justice is truth-telling and paying what one owes. Well, Socrates reflects on this, and he proposes a counterexample. He says, wait a minute. What if you've borrowed a knife, for example, from a friend, and promised to return it when he needs it? The friend comes and asks you for the knife, and you realize that he's very upset. You say, well, what's going on? Why do you need it? And he says, that neighbor of mine, I've had it with him. I'm going to go kill him. Now, should you give him the knife back? Socrates says, no. It is not the just thing to do to return the knife. Now, on the one hand, you owe it to him. After all, you're supposed to pay what you owe, and you did promise to give the knife back. You do owe him the knife. On the other hand, it seems like the wrong thing to do to return it to a crazy person who's intent on murder. So Socrates says, I'm not convinced. Well, Polemarchus, who is overhearing this, steps in. And he says, wait a minute. I think Cephalus is on to something. He quotes the poet Simonides as saying, justice is giving people their due. Giving people what you owe them, in effect. Giving people their due. Now, lots of philosophers have defended a view like that. And in fact, you might think it's analytic. What do they do? Well, what it would be just to give them. So it might not be informative. And indeed, very quickly, Socrates moves beyond this and presses for more information, partly because this doesn't seem very informative. What is someone's due? We have to ask that in turn, and we're looking for a real substantive answer to that. Well, at this point, we get the third definition. Polemarchus says, one should benefit friends and harm enemies. Well, lots of people do live their lives that way. In politics, it often seems like that's the name of the game, benefiting your friends and harming your enemies. But Socrates says there are several things that are odd about this. One is that you might think the person who then knows best what justice is the person who best knows how to benefit their friends and harm their enemies. But who does that? For example, when it comes to medical advice, who knows best how to help someone or how to harm them? Well, the skilled physician, somebody who knows the most about medicine. Suppose we're talking about building, and somebody wants us to build them a house. The person who would best know how to benefit them, but also best know how to harm them, is, well, depending on the angle you're taking here, the architect, the engineer, the builder. And so it looks suddenly as if, wait a minute. You're talking about skilled craftspeople in all these various areas who would then be the most capable of justice. They would be the ones who would actually know justice the best. But that seems wrong. It seems like skill in a given area is not the same as justice. In addition to that, Socrates says, it looks as if there's something wrong. What is it to harm something or someone? It's to make them worse. If I harm this table, I'm making it a worse table. But it seems odd to think that justice, or any part of it, consists in making people worse. So I think here you could object, wait a minute. There's a difference between making someone worse and making them worse off. If I make you pay a fine, for example, I may be making you worse off because you've now got to pay this fine. On the other hand, I'm not making you a worse person. So I think Socrates is cheating a little here, but let's move on. Polemarchus says, it is just to benefit the friend if he's good, and harm the enemy if he's bad. But of course, this falls prey to the same objections as the last one. It looks as if harming something makes it worse. Weird to think that's part of justice. But also the person who knows how to do this, well, is the person who knows how to judge the good and the bad part, yes. But then the person who actually knows how to apply this harm. And so again, we get into the skilled craftsman problem. So that doesn't really help.